This is not going to happen overnight. 30 years, I think Don was talking, at least, okay? I love using analogies. It's like steering an aircraft carrier. Some of you have heard me refer to that. To change the course, it's going to take a long time to steer that aircraft carrier, okay? The other analogy I like to use on this subject is the milking stool and a three-legged milking stool. Everybody knows what a three-legged milking stool is, right? Okay, all right. I use that analogy in my office, and the guys looked at me like the dog that turns their head sideways. So one of the legs, and the reason I use the three legs is because that if any one of those are compromised, you're going to fall over every time. You're not going to be successful. The one leg I count as the law enforcement, which includes the entire judicial system, prosecution, things of the whole thing. It encompasses law enforcement. The other critical leg is victim services. That's where Stephanie comes in, okay? And all of the stuff that they bring to bear on the problem. And the third leg is community outreach, community awareness, community education. And that's where the subcommittee of our CPAB committee, the cost committee, there you go, Committee on Sex Traffic. That's where they're starting, they're at their infancy stages, starting to get that out there and get that paradigm shift to occur. So those are the three, and one other part that falls within that is what's called the environmental issues associated with what's going on. What that means is the environments within your community that help facilitate the ongoing problem. The dark streets, you know, mostly the dark streets in your neighborhoods, quite honestly. That's what that is. Things of that nature. In fact, on that subject, they're going to have a couple professors coming to do that type of a survey here in the very near future, so we'll be able to get that going. So those are the three components that make up those three legs of that milking stool. So I'm not going to get down in the weeds on statistics. You'll hear about that from some of the other guests here to speak. I'll throw out a word of advice when it comes to statistics. Just take it with a grain of salt. Okay, I've been doing this particular subject for 4 years. I don't know where the little guy is with the little clicker that does all these countings and stuff like that. I don't know where that person is. So just take things with a grain of salt. And I'm here to tell you, I frequently book the girls that we arrest. Not because believe me, at my rank, I don't have to do that. Okay, but I do it primarily as an intel opportunity. I actually talk to the girls, and they'll tell me a whole lot of stuff. And one of the last girls who I booked, she was, at the time, when I booked her, 32. And when I was talking to her, asked her at what age did she actually get turned out by a pimp. And she said she was 14 when she got turned out. So that's about the youngest and then we've actually arrested a 14-year-old. So that's about the youngest that we've encountered. So that's just, you're going to hear some numbers. So more research needs to be done if we're going to be throwing numbers up. Okay. Is there any questions that anybody in attendance has?
Don.
Yeah, Don.
Actually, Ron, you know, from what I've heard from the city attorney's office, some of the prosecutors have prosecuted the Johns.
Mm-hmm.
The judges almost laughingly dismissed the charges for the most part, refused to put these guys in jail, almost refused to fine them, and look for reasons to really let them go because they say prostitution's been around for centuries. What's the deal? If we can put these judges in our neighborhoods, they might see what the real deal is. And I know you have no control.
Right. But with that being said, the enforcement on the demand side of the house is something that we are increasing our efforts in as well, because you can't take a one-sided approach to the enforcement component to it. And unfortunately, I hadn't really had enough investigators to get that. But I've recently added 2 new investigators to the unit, so I'm up to 5 investigators now. So, yeah. Yes.
Well, a couple of things. One is, I don't see that the John is the problem. I think it's the problem. And the emphasis should be on arresting and Well, where people hang out.
The-
Should be.
Typically, those engaging in the acts of prostitution, the girls and the Johns, they don't care where a garbage can is. When they're actually in broad daylight sitting in your driveway engaging in a sex act, they really aren't going to be concerned where they toss that used condom. I've watched them driving down the street and then the John just throws them out. They don't care. That's the problem. Because typically it's not their community. They don't live in that immediate area. So that's typically what we see there. As far as the focusing efforts on any one aspect of it, I would discourage that. It needs to be all three, the pimp, the girl, and the John. Okay, you can't ignore any one component to that. It gets lopsided, okay? No, I'm just saying, because it's been suggested before. But as far as the pimping component, I do agree with you that they are hardened criminals. By and large, they have extensive criminal rap sheets. They come from very violent backgrounds. They are the quintessential predator, okay? They have the ability to identify the vulnerabilities in their victims, in their targets, and they are willing to invest whatever time and energy is necessary to get them to do what they want them to do. And so basically, for lack of a better term, deprogramming that is a very time-consuming process. You got a question, ma'am?
You mentioned 14-year-old, and it reminded me that Governor Brown sent a call last September saying that schools need to teach their students, starting in junior high school, middle school, about how to stay safe from predators, as you just mentioned. So they need to know the signs. If they're sitting in a mall and someone says, "You look cute, I'm going to get you into a magazine," you know, they really need to be suspicious about things like that. As well as
Absolutely.
internet safety.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not being done now, but it really needs to be.
Yeah, the internet has taken this entirely to a whole new level as far as how extending the reach of the predator to the victim. It opens up that base quite a bit. Yes, sir, in the back.
Just a quick question. When John is arrested
Uh-huh.
and it's done that, does it actually prevent him from doing it again? Is it really a deterrent or is it just an inconvenience?
Well, now with respect to the what's called the John School, that's the diversionary aspect like they have for the girls, that they have to be convicted on a prostitution charge, either loitering or actual solicitation of prostitution. And depending on what operation we're working, we can get either one. Typically, what would happen is we would get the John, if it wasn't in a thing where I put out a female officer, we'd catch them where they're in their car engaged in the act. Then we would go with lewd conduct. But that doesn't they wouldn't qualify for the John School for that. And the reason we want them to, so now we're booking them on the loitering for prostitution component to it. And we want them to go to the John School because that's an 8-hour class where they are, you know, it's brought to light. They actually have girls that come in and talk about the life and how it's negatively impact them. So there's that. And I'm going to throw out a number, 70% of those who have attended John School have not been arrested for a subsequent, incident. Does that mean they're not doing it, or does it mean they just didn't get caught? Okay, I mean, so that's why I say, just take numbers for what they're worth. You know what I'm saying? Okay, but again, we can't ignore that component to it, and it's about education, and that's about educating the John and changing that, getting that paradigm shift, and not doing that. Somebody had a hand up over here, I thought. Oh, stop. Uh-huh.
How important it is for the retreat in attacking this issue in terms of getting everybody involved, probation.
So for those of you who don't know, we have a new Valley Bureau Deputy Chief, Bob Green. Recently, he brought us together, and us being the sergeants in charge of the divisions most impacted by street walking, prostitution, Van Nuys, Mission, Foothill, and North Hollywood. And then then he brought the other resources to bear. Stephanie was there, DCFS was there, the city attorney was there, a bunch of other people. It was a full room. And so it appears as though that the chief is in the process of putting together a human trafficking task force at the bureau level to help focus the specialized investigative techniques to get those pimps and get them in jail, because it's a very long process that has to go into and investigations have to be very thorough when they do the presentation for conviction. And unfortunately, my guys have been very successful in their prosecutions. We've got a very high conviction rate, and they plead out at the beginning. They don't even go to trial because they're looking at some potentially heavyweight time. Anything else? I've taken up a whole bunch of time.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant Fisher. Thank you very much. All right, next I want to bring up Chris and VJ with the DEA. Are you guys ready? Come on down.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm VJ Rathi. I'm an agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. I know today's forum is about sex trafficking, and it's been quite an education listening to Sergeant Fisher and Dr. Powell and learning a lot about that. We're going to focus a little bit to tell you about the DEA in general, and then I have my colleague with me, Chris Wilson. He's a member of our Special Investigations Unit, and they deal with drug investigations as they relate to counterterrorism. So we're going to try to educate you a little bit about that. I will have something to say at the end, but what I do know about sex trafficking as it relates to drug trafficking investigations, there's a small component of it, but I'll just start talking to you generally about the DEA for those of you who aren't familiar with us. So DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, is an element of the United States Department of Justice, which is headed by the Attorney General Loretta Lynch. So the Department of Justice has 4 law enforcement components. The FBI, and our brother from the FBI is here, which you're all obviously very familiar with. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, known as the ATF, who handle gun trafficking investigations, as well as the United States Marshals, who handle court security and, of course, apprehension of violent fugitives, and then us, the DEA. So our mission at the DEA is essentially to disrupt and dismantle large-scale international drug trafficking organizations. So our bread and butter as investigators is to investigate on a global conspiracy level these organizations who are importing drugs into the United States, and then their cells that are distributing them around the United States, and then also the laundering of the money that's generated, the sales from these sales, the bulk cash, and how that money is laundered and distributed back to the ultimate sources of supply. So here, Los Angeles is what we call in the DEA a source city. That means that drugs are generally consolidated, almost like we're just a big warehouse here in Los Angeles and to some extent in San Diego and also in Riverside County for distribution all across the United States. The big 4 that we deal with, and you're all familiar with it, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. Now, there's obviously other drug threats out there that are very serious, like ecstasy and synthetic drugs and things like that. But those are the big 4, and most of those drugs come across the U.S.-Mexico border into the United States, and they're consolidated in large quantities and then subsequently distributed around the L.A. area as well as throughout the country. And then when those drugs are sold, that money filters its way back, usually to Southern California, where it's consolidated, and then it's sent back to usually to Mexico. But also we see a lot of marijuana and ecstasy that come from Canada as well. So there's different source countries all over the world, but mostly in LA. That's kind of what we're dealing with. So our goal here in Los Angeles is basically to investigate on a large-scale international level the main cells of these organizations, whether they are importing the drugs and then distributing it on a wholesale level, large-scale wholesale level, and then how is that money being brought back here and then laundered. That's our bread and butter. So our authority, enforcement authority, derives from Title 21 of the United States Code. That's the Controlled Substances Act. We also have an authority to enforce Title 18, which is the federal money laundering statutes. Okay, so that is our jurisdiction. And that's why probably with sex trafficking, it's not our bread and butter. That's not part of the enforcement authority which we have. However, as I'll get to towards the end, there is a relationship between large-scale federal drug investigations and human trafficking. So we have some other missions that I'll briefly kind of go through. We also support a lot of non-enforcement programs aimed at reducing the availability of drugs on the street. We do a lot of education and outreach. If you go to our website at dea.gov, it's a fantastic website, and it has a variety of resources aimed towards educating the public about the dangers of the various drugs, what their effects are, how they're sold, how they're packaged, what the prices are, so that, and especially outreach to elementary schools and children to make them aware of what they're seeing, and when somebody offers them a particular drug, what is the consequences, both physically, medically, legally, of taking these drugs. And we do our best to try to outreach as much as we can to the community to essentially stop kids from taking the drugs in the first place. So the other part of our agency, the other part of our mission is we have the enforcement side that handles the drug investigations, and then we also have a diversion side. And what diversion investigators in our agency do, they're not sworn law enforcement officers, but they are investigators. And what they do is they focus on the diversion of otherwise legal drugs for illegal uses. So, for example, prescription painkillers that are that might be diverted and sold on the street. So instead of being given to somebody with a legitimate medical need and taken as prescribed, they're obtained fraudulently and then sold on the street. And as I'll get to a little bit later, that has led to the abuse of prescription painkillers has led to a slew of problems with regard to the heroin epidemic that has basically swept our nation. So that's something I can get into a little bit later or take some questions on if you want. So we have about 9,300 employees worldwide. 9,300, and so we're not quite as big as our brothers from the Bureau, but we're fairly extensive. One of our strengths, we have 21 field divisions across the country, 21, and Los Angeles is one of the biggest ones. And then within those field divisions, we have various offices because the field divisions cover like a wider geographical area. So we'll have district offices, resident offices, posts of duty, and things that are smaller, and kind of in that order. For example, in LA, we actually cover Southern California, like 5 counties in Southern California, but we also cover Nevada, all of Hawaii, as well as Guam and Saipan. Yeah, so we have a very wide geographical scope. That's the Los Angeles division, okay, right. So, and then, within, we have the main office in LA, and then we have district offices in Riverside, Vegas, Honolulu, and then smaller offices in Orange County, Ventura, and so forth. So we're very spread out all over, and this is 222 domestic offices over our 21 field divisions. Also, which is something that I think we're all very, very proud of as an agency, is we actually have 86 offices in 67 different foreign countries. Virtually every embassy in the world will have a DEA office, and we are there in a diplomatic in a diplomatic function. Okay, sorry, I'm just forgetting about you guys. So, so if you excuse me, we have a diplomatic function. We're working with the local the police in that country, and we're feeding them intelligence that we gain from the United States so that they can do their job over there, and they also will give us intelligence that we can bring back here. And what we do is we then try to create joint investigations that have a global scope, because we feel that dismantling things on a global level has a much greater impact than simply just making arrests at a local or even at a statewide level. Okay, so that's how we roll basically as the DEA. We try to go big picture. Oh, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamine. Yeah, right. Okay. So, and one of our other missions is seizure and forfeiture of assets derived from traceable to or intended to be used for drug trafficking. So basically, we try to take the drug dealer's money and forfeit it to the United States government. We feel that that is a big part of our mission. It has become a huge part of our mission, especially in the last 10 years, because we recognized its effectiveness in terms of trying to bankrupt these organizations and strategically take out various cells. We have a very active national drug intelligence program supported by intelligence research specialists who are basically like our partners. They're not out on the street, they're in the office, but they're the ones who crunch the phone numbers. They're the ones who create the charts that link all of these targets together, share the information across all of the DEA offices, and as well as our federal, state, and local counterparts who are working investigations with us, so that we can basically attack this problem, have the best information we have to attack this problem, the problem of drug trafficking globally and nationally. One of our other greatest strengths that we are very proud of as the DEA is our relationship with our partners. We work very closely with the FBI. We actually have a strike force at the DEA where we're basically split between half DEA, half FBI, an extremely effective group focusing on the Southwest border investigations. Chris will talk to you a little bit about our counterterrorism special investigations group. They work very closely with the FBI. We work very closely with ICE, HSI. And we have a very active task force officer program. What a task force officer is, it's a local or state police officer that we have asked, because they're a great investigator, we've asked them to come on board and become deputized and sworn as with the same powers as a DEA agent for a 5-year period. They will come and they'll work with us. We recognize this, it's very, very, we have a lot of task force officers with DEA, and it's essentially acts as a force multiplier. We try to create as much of a task force environment as we can within our agency, because if we have a task force officer from the Department of Probation and we need to do a probation search in order to further our investigation, well, instead of jumping through hoops and trying to call somebody, we have our partner from probation right next to us.
With like Ron Fisher, like would you guys?
Absolutely, we have many LAPD.
We'll let him know at the next meeting.
Yeah,
that he's going to be putting in some OT.
We have many. LAPD and LA sheriffs are probably the largest portion of our TFOs, but we have them from all over the LA area, and that's true all over the country. We very good relationships. Trying to see what else I can tell you. So here in LA, we have about 300 agents in Los Angeles. Okay, and we have about another 208 task force officers. And then we have a smaller number of intelligence research specialists, diversion investigators, and about 90 technical and administrative staffs. Our chain of command, we have a special agent in charge. Well, generally speaking, in the DEA, we have an administrator. His name is Chuck Rosenberg. He reports to the Attorney General. Below him, we have a deputy administrator. His name is Jack Riley. Chuck Rosenberg was just appointed as our administrator just a few weeks ago, replacing Michelle Lenhart. We have, at every field division, has a special agent in charge. Ours is Mr. Anthony Williams, who's been there for about, I think now, about three and a half years. And below him, we have 2 associate special agent in charge, which are kind of like the equivalent. He would be like the commander, and they would be like the captains. Then we have 8 assistant special agents in charge. They're like the equivalent of like a lieutenant, and then they supervise 5 to 6 what we call enforcement groups, and that is run by a group supervisor who has about 10 agents and/or task force officers under them. And that is how we are organized. So the group supervisors, like a sergeant, and the agents, like Chris and I are like the detectives. Okay, so that gives you an idea of our structure and how we operate within the DEA. And I think that's the general broad-based sketch of what we do. I think I'll turn it over to Chris now, who can talk a little bit about the SIU.
Thanks.
Thank you, VJ.
Good evening. Hopefully you guys can all hear me very well here. Thank you for giving us the time to come out here tonight and give you guys a little awareness of what DEA is and what we do. I'm going to try my best to not take up too much of your time, and I'm going to try my best to bridge what I speak about to your community as best I can. I've actually spent the better portion of 2013 and 14 here in this valley, all over the place, between Van Nuys and Woodland Hills and back. And then again, back in 2007, probably for a good solid 3 years, I spent a good solid 3 years here as well. So what that means is that we're here and we're working cases here, and we're doing our best here to try and make your community a better place. But DEA is more of a background player. So you don't see us a lot. You don't really hear about the things that we do. And as my colleague mentioned, what we do mostly is we partner with local law enforcement officers, and we conduct long-term investigations that last for years. And those long-term investigations target